Sarah Miller watched her 7-year-old son Ethan play with neighborhood children at the community park, grateful for the rare moment of normalcy. Then, without warning, Ethan collapsed onto the grass, his small body convulsing as other children scattered in fear. 3 agonizing days later, doctors at Memorial Hospital still had no diagnosis, while Ethan slipped deeper into unconsciousness. That's when their rescued German Shepherd, Max, escaped from their home, traveled 6 miles across town to the hospital, somehow found Ethan's room on the 3rd floor, and refused to leave the boy's bedside, growling at anyone who approached, even Sarah herself. What the desperate mother couldn't possibly know, as she watched the massive dog standing guard over her dying son, was that the mysterious stranger observing them from the hallway held a shocking truth about Max. A truth that would forever change their understanding of what it means to be protected. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Millfield, Pennsylvania had once been a thriving manufacturing town, but economic hardship had left its mark on the faded storefronts and quiet streets. Still, there was a resilience to the community, a stubbornness that refused to surrender to decline. It was this same resilience that Sarah Miller embodied as she navigated life as a widow and single mother. At 35, Sarah worked long shifts as a nurse at Memorial Hospital, her auburn hair often pulled back in a practical ponytail, green eyes sharp and observant from years of monitoring patients. 2 years had passed since she lost her husband Thomas in a violent car accident on Route 16, but the grief still lingered in the corners of their modest 2-story home on Maple Street. Ethan Miller had his mother's eyes and his father's quiet demeanor, though the silence that enveloped the 7-year-old now stemmed from something deeper than personality. The trauma of losing his father had wrapped around the boy like an invisible cloak, manifesting as selective mutism and anxiety that left him isolated from classmates. Where once laughter had filled their home, now Sarah would often find Ethan sitting alone in his room, small fingers tracing the outline of his father's photo. Their financial situation was precarious. A nurse's salary stretched thin by medical bills and the mortgage on a home chosen for a 2-income family. Sarah had learned to navigate the complex dance of bill payments and credit card juggling, all while maintaining a brave face for her son. It was Linda Parker, Sarah's best friend and fellow nurse, who had first suggested a therapy animal. "Kids heal differently than adults," she'd said during a rare coffee break. "Ethan needs something to love that isn't going anywhere." Linda remained skeptical. However, when Sarah chose a scarred German Shepherd with a mysterious past instead of the friendly Labrador the shelter had recommended, Dr. Rebecca Collins, Ethan's pediatrician, had dismissed Sarah's concerns about her son's withdrawal. "Give him time," she'd advised with the casual confidence of someone who hadn't watched a child disappear into himself. "Children are resilient." No one paid much attention when Frank Thompson moved into the yellow house across the street 3 months ago. The retired military man kept to himself, nodding politely but never engaging in neighborhood small talk. No one, that is, except for Max, whose ears would prick forward whenever the man appeared, a low growl building in his powerful chest. The decision to adopt a dog wasn't made lightly. Sarah had researched therapy animals for weeks, reading countless articles about their benefits for children experiencing trauma. Even so, she hesitated at the shelter entrance, questioning whether she could handle another responsibility when she was barely keeping their lives together. "Just look," Linda had urged, waiting in the car with a paperback novel. You don't have to decide today. The county animal shelter was housed in a converted warehouse, the concrete floors echoing with desperate barks and whines. Each enclosure they passed contained hopeful canines pressing against chain-link fencing, tails wagging in frantic bids for attention. Sarah guided Ethan down the long aisle, watching for any spark of interest in his downcast eyes. "Most of these fellas are real friendly," explained the shelter worker. A heavy-set woman named Doris with kind eyes and a name tag covered in paw prints. That golden mix would be perfect for a child gentle as can be. But Ethan showed no reaction until they reached the last kennel. Unlike the others, this dog wasn't jumping or barking. A large German shepherd sat upright in the back corner, amber eyes watching them with an intensity that made Sarah instinctively tighten her grip on Ethan's hand. "That's Max," Doris said, her voice dropping. "He's got a more complicated history. Found him wandering near the old military storage facility out on Route 9. Someone had worked him hard. He's got scars under that coat, but he's passed all our temperament tests." Before Sarah could steer him away, Ethan had pulled free of her grasp. He approached the fence and extended his small hand, palm out. "Careful now," Doris cautioned. "He doesn't usually—" The words died in her throat as Max rose and approached with measured steps. The German shepherd sniffed Ethan's fingers, then pressed his massive head against the boy's palm. "He likes me," Ethan whispered the first words Sarah had heard from her son in public for nearly 6 months. Doris shook her head in disbelief. "That dog hasn't approached anyone voluntarily since he got here 3 months ago." Even with that moment of connection, Sarah had reservations. The dog was enormous, with powerful jaws and muscles rippling beneath his black and tan coat. The adoption paperwork included multiple warnings about German shepherds being working dogs needing experienced handlers. "I'm not sure he's right for us," Sarah told the adoption counselor. "We need something easier." "Mom?" Ethan's voice was barely audible, but his eyes were pleading as he looked up at her. "He's sad, too." 3 hours later, Max was cautiously exploring their small backyard while Doris reviewed care instructions. "I should tell you," she added hesitantly. "We had interest from others, but something never felt right. One fella in particular was real insistent military type. Said Max looked like dogs he'd worked with overseas." Sarah nodded absently, watching Ethan watch the dog. "Any idea what happened to him before he was found?"
"None."
"Except," Doris hesitated, "he responds to commands. Not just the basics, either. Someone trained him proper. And it wasn't for show competitions." The first night, Max slept in the corner of the living room on the plaid dog bed Sarah had purchased, his eyes tracking every movement. He accepted food and water politely but maintained a careful distance, especially from Sarah. The breakthrough came 3 days later. Sarah woke to Ethan's muffled cries, another nightmare about the accident. She rushed toward his room but stopped in the hallway, surprised to see Max already there. The German shepherd stood beside Ethan's bed, nudging the boy's hand with his nose. As Sarah watched, Ethan's fingers curled into the dog's fur, and his breathing gradually steadied. In the weeks that followed, Max became Ethan's shadow. The dog's reserved demeanor remained with adults, but with Ethan, there was a gentle patience. Sarah would find them sitting together in the backyard, Ethan reading aloud from books he'd previously refused to touch. It was during Max's first bath that Sarah discovered the scars, long, pale lines beneath his coat that spoke of old injuries. There were other peculiarities, too, the way Max inspected the perimeter of their yard each morning, how he positioned himself between Ethan and the door when strangers knocked, his habit of sleeping facing entrances. Neighbors had mixed reactions to the large German shepherd. Mrs. Wilson from next door brought over homemade dog biscuits, while Mr. Hatcher across the street complained about military dogs being unpredictable. None of that mattered to Sarah when she heard Ethan laugh for the first time in years as Max chased a tennis ball across their small yard. The sound was like water in a desert, so precious she felt tears spring to her eyes. "I think he was waiting for us," Ethan told her that evening as Max lay across his feet during dinner, his first complete sentence in months. "Just like we were waiting for him." Frank Thompson arrived in Millfield with little fanfare. Moving into the yellow craftsman house across the street that had stood empty since old Mrs. Abernathy passed. Neighbors noticed the precision with which he maintained his lawn and the early morning hours he kept, but few managed more than a passing conversation with the broad-shouldered man with the military straight posture. It was during their evening walk, a routine Max had quickly established, when Sarah first noticed the connection. Max, typically alert but calm on their neighborhood strolls, suddenly stiffened ears forward, body rigid. Following his gaze, Sarah spotted their new neighbor retrieving mail from his box. "Good evening," she called, raising her hand in a neighborly wave. Frank nodded, his eyes fixed not on her, but on Max. Something passed between man and dog, a recognition that made the hair on Sarah's arms rise. Max neither growled nor wagged his tail, but his attention remained unwavering. "German Shepherd," Frank stated rather than asked. "Working line, Belgian Malinois mix, maybe." His assessment was delivered with quiet authority. "Just a rescue," Sarah replied, suddenly protective. "Come on, Ethan. Time to head home." As they turned away, she could feel Frank's eyes following them down the street. The incident at Riverside Park occurred the following weekend. Sarah had spread a blanket beneath the oak trees, watching Ethan and Max explore while other families enjoyed the warm Saturday afternoon. A group of children were sharing snacks nearby, and one boy, Jason, from Ethan's class, offered Ethan a handful of grapes from his lunch. Before Ethan could accept, Max intervened, placing himself between the boys and nudging Ethan's hand away from the fruit. "Max, stop!" Sarah scolded, embarrassed. "That's not polite." But the German Shepherd was insistent, gently but firmly preventing Ethan from taking the grapes. Sarah apologized to Jason's mother and led Ethan and Max to another spot, attributing the behavior to food guarding, something Doris had warned might happen with rescue dogs. She dismissed the incident until Monday morning, when Linda called from the hospital. "Jason Miller's in the ER with food poisoning. Half his class, too, something about contaminated grapes from that big grocery store on Lincoln Avenue. Hasn't Ethan been sick?" Sarah felt a cold tingle along her spine. "No. He's fine." That evening, Frank Thompson was waiting by their driveway when they returned from school. He kept a respectful distance, but his focus remained entirely on Max. "That's a special dog you've got," he said without preamble. "Military trained, isn't he?" "He's just a rescue," Sarah repeated, unloading Ethan's backpack from the car. "We don't know his background. Does he alert to anything behaviors you can't explain?" Frank pressed, taking a step closer. Sarah positioned herself between the man and her son. "I'm sorry, but why are you asking about my dog?" Frank's expression shifted, almost apologetic. "Just curious. I worked with canine units. Your boy's dog reminds me of some special ones I knew." Before Sarah could respond, Max had moved to stand beside Ethan, his posture subtly changing from relaxed to vigilant. Frank noticed, too. "Interesting," he murmured before walking away. That night marked the beginning of Max's new sleeping arrangement. When bedtime came, the German Shepherd refused to stay downstairs, instead following Ethan to his room and settling beneath the boy's bed. No amount of coaxing would move him, and eventually Sarah relented. Something about the dog's determination reassuring rather than concerning. Over the next few weeks, Ethan began complaining of headaches. Nothing severe, just occasional discomfort that Dr. Collins dismissed as seasonal allergies or eye strain from reading. Sarah wasn't entirely convinced, especially when she noticed Max's behavior intensifying. The dog would press his nose against Ethan's temple when the boy winced in pain, whining softly as if trying to communicate something urgent. The confrontation with Frank occurred on a Tuesday afternoon. Sarah had left work early, an unusual luxury afforded by a canceled appointment. Approaching her house, she spotted their neighbor standing across the street, aiming what appeared to be a camera lens toward her property. Max was in the fenced backyard with Ethan, both visible through the side gate. "What do you think you're doing?" Sarah demanded, marching across the street. Frank lowered the device quickly. "Mrs. Miller, I can explain. Are you photographing my son, my dog?" Anger and fear coalesced into a protective fury. "I'm calling the police." "That's not necessary," Frank insisted, backing away. "I'm not who you think." He turned abruptly and strode toward his house, dropping something in his haste. Sarah waited until he was inside before cautiously approaching the fallen item, a set of dog tags. Not the decorative civilian kind, but official military issue. The name was partially worn away, but she could make out Project Guard before the text became illegible. That night, after Ethan was asleep, Sarah researched military working dogs on her laptop. The more she read, the more Max's behaviors aligned with trained service animals, his alertness, protective instincts, and disciplined demeanor. One article about military dogs mentioned their ability to detect changes in human body chemistry, from drugs to disease. The next morning, she tested a theory. Speaking clearly in the commanding tone suggested by a canine training website, she issued a command, "Max, watch." The German Shepherd's response was immediate ears forward, posture alert. "Max, find Ethan." Without hesitation, Max trotted upstairs to where Ethan was getting dressed. Sarah tried again, this time with a phrase she'd found on a German dog training site. "Max, Achtung." The response was identical, immediate attention and readiness. Her heart raced as she realized that whatever Max's past, it involved professional training far beyond basic obedience. The question was training for what purpose? The answer began to take shape that weekend. Ethan woke with a slight fever, 99.8 degrees, nothing alarming, but before Sarah had even placed her hand on his forehead, Max was already in distress, pacing between Ethan's bed and the door, whining with unusual urgency. "What is it, boy?" Sarah asked, watching as Max returned repeatedly to nudge the same spot on Ethan's head, the right temple where the boy had been experiencing his headaches. For the first time since adopting Max, Sarah felt a chill of genuine fear. Not of the dog, but of what he might be trying to tell her. The county animal shelter offered little additional information about Max's background when Sarah called Monday morning. The intake paperwork listed only the basics: male German Shepherd, approximately 4 years old, found wandering near the decommissioned military storage facility on Route 9, no microchip or identification. "I remember that dog," said the shelter manager when Sarah pressed for details. "The animal control officer who brought him in mentioned something odd. Said Max was found near a chain-link fence, sitting at attention like he was waiting for someone. Wasn't running loose like most strays." "Was there any military connection? Any indication he might have been a working dog?" Sarah asked. A pause stretched over the line. "Nothing official. Though there was a man who came asking about him specifically, said he was with a veterans program that rehabilitated military dogs. But he couldn't provide any documentation, so we couldn't release the dog to him." "What did this man look like?" "Tall, close-cropped gray hair. Military bearing. Said his name was Franklin, or Francis, something, with an F." Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. "Frank. That might have been it. Is there a problem with the dog? Mrs. Miller. Any aggressive behavior?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "No, nothing like that. He's wonderful with my son. I'm just curious about his training." After hanging up, Sarah called the veterinary clinic where she'd taken Max for his initial checkup. Dr. James Anderson was in his 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the gentle hands of someone who'd spent decades handling animals. He agreed to see them that afternoon during his lunch break. "You think Max might be a service dog of some kind?" Dr. Anderson asked as he ran practiced hands over the German Shepherd, who tolerated the examination stoically. "He's more than just well-behaved," Sarah explained, describing Max's protective behaviors and his apparent ability to detect Ethan's fever. "And he responds to commands in different languages." Dr. Anderson nodded thoughtfully. "There are dogs trained to detect medical conditions. Seizure alert dogs. Diabetes alert dogs. They can sense subtle changes in body chemistry that we can't perceive." He examined Max's teeth, then the scars beneath his coat. "These aren't abuse marks, they're surgical scars. Clean, precise. This dog received professional veterinary care. So he could be a medical alert dog." "Possibly. There are also military working dogs trained for various purposes. Some can detect explosives or drugs by smell. The military has experimented with training dogs to detect certain diseases as well." Dr. Anderson straightened up, patting Max's side. "I have a colleague who works with service dog organizations. Let me make a call." As Sarah and Max left the clinic, she spotted Frank Thompson's truck parked across the street. The man himself was nowhere in sight. But the deliberate placement of the vehicle felt like surveillance rather than coincidence. Ethan's school called the following day. Principal Davies' voice held the forced neutrality of someone delivering unwelcome news. "Mrs. Miller, we need to discuss the accommodation you've requested for Ethan." The accommodation was allowing Max to accompany Ethan to school, something Sarah had requested after noticing how her son's anxiety decreased significantly in the dog's presence. She'd even obtained a note from Ethan's therapist supporting the arrangement. "We've reviewed your request," Principal Davies continued, "but our policy on animals is quite clear. Without official service dog certification, we cannot allow Max on school grounds. Several parents have expressed concerns about a large German Shepherd among young children." "Max is gentle with children," Sarah insisted. "He's helping Ethan. My son has spoken more in the past month than in the entire year before." "I understand. But without proper documentation—" The principal's voice trailed off, implying the decision was final. That afternoon, Ethan returned from school withdrawn and silent, retreating to his room where he curled against Max's solid presence. The improvement Sarah had witnessed over recent weeks seemed to evaporate in a single day of separation from his canine companion. The situation sparked unexpected controversy in Millfield. Linda stood firmly in Sarah's corner, helping her research service dog requirements and reaching out to advocacy groups. Other parents from Ethan's school, however, sided with the administration's caution. "It's not that we don't sympathize," explained Bethany Wilson, PTA president, during an awkward encounter at the grocery store. "But you have to understand that's a very large dog with an unknown background. Safety has to come first." The phrase, "unknown background," followed Sarah home, echoing her own growing concerns about Max's mysterious past and Frank Thompson's interest in him. That evening, she called the local VFW hall and asked about Frank, describing him as a new neighbor she was trying to welcome. "Thompson," repeated the older man who answered. "Yeah, he comes to meetings sometimes. Keeps to himself mostly. Handler in the K9 unit, did several tours overseas. Good man, from what I hear, though he's been through some rough patches since his discharge." The confirmation of Frank's military background and K9 experience transformed Sarah's suspicion into something more complex. If Frank recognized something special about Max, perhaps he wasn't a threat, but a potential resource. Meanwhile, Ethan's headaches were becoming more frequent. Dr. Collins remained dismissive, suggesting stress from school is the likely cause, but prescribed mild pain relievers and recommended limiting screen time. Sarah began keeping a detailed journal, noting when the headaches occurred and Max's corresponding behaviors. A pattern emerged. Max's attention to the right side of Ethan's head intensified before the onset of pain, not after. The dog seemed to detect something before symptoms appeared. The following Saturday, Sarah took Ethan to the community park, hoping fresh air might help his latest headache. Max accompanied them, vigilant as always. They were near the small duck pond when disaster nearly struck. Ethan, reaching to point out a turtle, lost his balance on the muddy bank and slipped toward the water. Before Sarah could react, Max lunged forward. Rather than grabbing Ethan's clothing as a pet might, the German Shepherd executed what appeared to be a trained rescue maneuver, seizing the back of Ethan's jacket with precision, planting his feet, and using his body weight to counterbalance the boy's momentum. The incident lasted seconds, but the methodical nature of Max's response left Sarah breathless. This was not instinct, but training-specific, professional training. From across the park, she noticed Frank Thompson watching, his expression unreadable from a distance. That night, Sarah searched online for Project Guardian plus military dogs. The partial text she'd seen on the dog tags Frank dropped. The results were sparse, mostly speculation on veterans' forums about various military working dog programs. One post mentioned rumored programs involving dogs trained to detect medical conditions in soldiers, but details were scarce and sources questionable. Her research was interrupted by Ethan's cry from upstairs. She found him sitting up in bed, holding his head, tears streaming down his face. "It hurts, Mom. It really hurts." Max was already there, whining anxiously, repeatedly nudging the same spot on Ethan's temple with his nose. The pediatric urgent care center was open until midnight. The doctor on duty examined Ethan carefully but found nothing concerning. "Migraines can develop in children his age," she explained, prescribing a different pain reliever. "Keep a food diary. Sometimes there are triggers." Throughout the examination, Max remained unusually agitated in the waiting room with Linda, who had come to offer support. When they returned home at nearly 1 in the morning, the German shepherd inspected Ethan thoroughly, his behavior growing more distressed when he focused on the boy's head. "He knows something," Sarah whispered to Linda. "I swear he's trying to tell me something's wrong." Linda's expression reflected concern, though whether for Ethan's health or Sarah's state of mind wasn't clear. Dogs are intuitive, but they're not diagnostic tools. Sarah, you need to trust the doctors. The doctors aren't listening. They've dismissed every concern since Thomas died. Do you know how many times I took Ethan in after the accident, knowing something wasn't right? How many times they told me it was just anxiety or attention-seeking? Linda squeezed her hand. "What about a second opinion? I could ask Dr. Mercer to see him. He's more thorough." The following morning, Sarah found an envelope tucked into her mailbox, no postage, just her name written in precise block letters. Inside was a single page, a printout of a military document with most text redacted. Only the header remained visible: Project Guardian Canine Medical Detection Initiative. At the bottom, someone had written, "The dog knows, room 302 Memorial Hospital, 2 p.m. today." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the note. The handwriting matched the precise lettering on Frank Thompson's fence permit she'd noticed displayed in his window, required by the Homeowners Association for any exterior modifications. Memorial Hospital's room 302 was in the administrative wing, used for small meetings and consultations. Sarah arranged for Ethan to spend the afternoon with Linda, claiming a work meeting. She arrived early, heart pounding as she tried to appear casual while checking the empty room. Frank Thompson arrived exactly at 2, closing the door behind him. He looked different in the fluorescent lighting, older, more careworn than he appeared from across the street. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Miller," he said formally. "Why all the secrecy? Why have you been watching my dog, watching my son?" Sarah demanded, keeping the desk between them. Frank sat heavily in one of the chairs. "Because Max isn't just any dog, and I need to be certain before I approached you officially." He placed a folder on the desk. "Max was part of Project Guardian, a specialized canine program I helped develop. These dogs were trained to detect neurological abnormalities through scent changes in human biochemistry that precede seizures, strokes, even tumors." Sarah stared at him. "You're saying Max can smell diseases?" "Not all diseases. The program focused specifically on neurological conditions that emit specific biomarkers through breath, sweat, or skin secretions. Dogs like Max have over 300 million olfactory receptors compared to our 6 million. They can detect concentrations as small as parts per trillion." "Why are you telling me this now?" Frank's expression darkened. "Because Max is showing alert behaviors with your son. I've been observing to confirm my suspicions before alarming you unnecessarily, but his patterns are consistent with how these dogs alert to potential neuroabnormalities." Sarah sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "Ethan's headaches. Have doctors examined him thoroughly? MRI, CT scan? They say it's just stress or migraines. They won't order expensive tests without clear indications." Frank's jaw tightened. The military abandoned Project Guardian despite its successes. Too expensive, they said. Technological alternatives were being developed. The dogs were supposed to be repurposed, or... He didn't finish the sentence. Max escaped. Several dogs did, with help from handlers who believed in the program. Most were captured. Max disappeared completely until I spotted him with your son. Frank leaned forward. Miss Miller, Sarah, I lost my canine partner in Afghanistan. When I returned and joined Project Guardian, it was to honor his memory by helping develop dogs that saved lives differently. I've seen these dogs detect conditions before any medical equipment could. I've also seen what happens when their alerts are ignored. Sarah thought of Max's persistent focus on Ethan's right temple, his increasing agitation, the way he'd positioned himself between Ethan and the world as if trying to protect him from an invisible threat. "What should I do?" she asked quietly. "Demand comprehensive neurological testing. Be specific about symptoms. Don't mention the dog's alerts. Most medical professionals will dismiss it. But don't wait. Sarah, Max's behavior suggests urgency." As Sarah drove home, her mind raced with competing emotions: fear for Ethan, uncertainty about trusting a near stranger, and the undeniable evidence of Max's unusual behavior. She called Dr. Collins' office, insisting on a referral to a neurologist. The receptionist was sympathetic but non-committal, promising to relay the request to the doctor. That night, after Ethan was asleep with Max maintaining his vigilant position under the bed, Sarah reviewed her journal of symptoms and the dog's corresponding behaviors. The pattern was undeniable. Max had been trying to communicate something specific about Ethan for weeks, and she had failed to fully understand. As if sensing her thoughts, Max emerged from Ethan's room and approached where she sat at the kitchen table. The German shepherd placed his head on her lap, amber eyes meeting hers with an intelligence that transcended ordinary animal awareness. "You're trying to help him, aren't you?" she whispered, running her hand over the dog's head. "You've been trying all along." Max's ears twitched forward at her words, his gaze unwavering. In that moment, Sarah made her decision. If the medical establishment wouldn't listen, she would find someone who would. Her son's life might depend on it, and on the extraordinary dog who had come into their lives not by chance, but perhaps by providence. The collapse happened during Mrs. Harrison's third-grade math lesson. One moment, Ethan was working quietly on multiplication tables. The next, he slumped forward, his small body sliding from the chair onto the classroom floor. The seizure that followed sent the classroom into chaos, children screaming, the teacher calling for help, the school nurse rushing in with the emergency response team. Sarah was elbow-deep in patient charts at Memorial Hospital when her phone rang. The school secretary's voice was professionally calm, but the words sent ice through Sarah's veins. Ethan's had some kind of episode. Ambulance. On their way to Memorial now. She abandoned her station without explanation, running through hospital corridors toward the emergency department. By the time she arrived, breathless and frantic, Ethan was already being evaluated behind curtain 3. Dr. Winters, the attending physician, met her with practiced compassion. "He had a tonic-clonic seizure at school," he explained, using the clinical term. "He's stable now but unconscious. We've ordered blood work, and we're preparing him for a CT scan." Sarah clutched the gurney rail, looking down at her son's pale face. He seemed impossibly small against the white hospital sheets. An oxygen cannula tucked beneath his nose, an IV line inserted into his arm. This wasn't just a headache or childhood stress. This was the emergency she had felt coming, the danger Max had been trying to alert her to for weeks. "Has he had seizures before?" Dr. Winters asked, making notes in Ethan's chart. "No. He's been having headaches right side, temple area. His pediatrician said they were migraines or stress." Sarah's voice cracked with frustration and fear. "I tried to get them to take it seriously." Dr. Winters nodded without judgment. We'll get answers. The CT will tell us if there's anything structural causing the seizure. We'll also run an EEG to check his brain activity. After Ethan was taken for imaging, Sarah stepped outside to call Linda. "Can you check on Max?" she asked, suddenly remembering the dog alone at home. "He'll be worried about Ethan." "Already on it," Linda assured her. "I called off my shift and I'm heading to your place now. How's our boy?" "Still unconscious. They're running tests." Sarah swallowed hard. "Linda, Max knew. He's been trying to tell me something was wrong with Ethan's head for weeks." There was a brief silence before Linda responded. "Let's focus on what the doctors find first." "Okay, I'll take care of Max. You take care of Ethan." Hours crawled by in the sterile waiting room. The CT scan results came back inconclusive. No obvious hemorrhage or large mass, but some areas of concern that required further investigation. An MRI was scheduled for the following morning, and Ethan was admitted to the pediatric floor for overnight observation. By nightfall, Ethan had regained consciousness but remained disoriented and lethargic. Sarah sat beside his bed, holding his hand and telling him stories about Max, promising they would be reunited soon. She had just stepped into the hallway to call Linda for an update when her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "Dog missing. Broke through screen door. Searching neighborhood." Sarah's heart sank. Max, somehow sensing Ethan's crisis, had escaped. She was about to call Linda back when commotion erupted at the nurses' station. "There's a dog in the building," someone shouted. "Security to pediatrics. Stat." Sarah ran toward the elevator bank in time to see the doors open, revealing Max wet from rain, panting heavily, a torn leash trailing behind him. Before anyone could react, the German Shepherd bolted past startled visitors, navigating the hospital corridor with uncanny precision. Security guards gave chase, but Max was faster. Ducking around corners and evading capture, Sarah called out, "Max! Here!" The dog skidded to a halt, turning at her voice. Their eyes met across the corridor, Max's filled with desperate purpose, Sarah's with dawning understanding. "Come," she commanded, and Max obeyed immediately, pressing against her legs as uniformed security guards approached. "Ma'am, pets aren't allowed in the hospital," the lead guard stated firmly. "We'll need to remove the animal immediately." "This is my son's service dog," Sarah improvised, placing a protective hand on Max's head. "He must have escaped from our friend's care. I'm so sorry for the disruption." The guard looked skeptical. "We don't have any service animals registered for this floor. My son was just admitted today after a seizure. The paperwork probably hasn't caught up." Sarah projected a confidence she didn't feel. "Please, my son needs him. Max is trained to detect seizures without proper documentation. Is there a problem here, Dr. Anderson's voice interrupted the standoff. The veterinarian approached from the direction of the visitor elevators, his medical ID badge from the affiliated veterinary center clipped to his jacket. Sarah had never been so relieved to see a familiar face. "Dr. Anderson, I don't understand, why are you here?" "Linda called me about Max disappearing. When the shelter mentioned a German Shepherd had been spotted entering the hospital, I thought I might be needed." He turned to the security guards. "I can vouch for this animal's training and behavior. Perhaps we could discuss the situation privately, rather than in the corridor." The authority in his voice and the official-looking badge created just enough doubt to pause the immediate ejection. The head of security was called, and after a tense discussion in a small consultation room during which Max behaved impeccably, a temporary compromise was reached. Max could remain with Ethan until morning, provided Dr. Anderson stayed to supervise and the dog remained leashed. When Max was finally allowed into Ethan's room, the reunion brought tears to Sarah's eyes. The German shepherd approached the bed cautiously, sniffing Ethan's hands and face before settling his head gently on the mattress beside the boy. Ethan, still groggy, managed to reach out and touch Max's fur. "You came," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Max whined softly, then returned to alerting repeatedly, focusing on the same area of Ethan's head that had been his concern for weeks. Dr. Anderson watched with professional interest. "Linda mentioned your concerns about Max's behavior. How long has he been targeting that specific area?" "Weeks," Sarah replied. "The headache started there. I've been keeping a journal." She pulled out her phone, showing him the notes she'd meticulously recorded. As Dr. Anderson reviewed her observations, his expression grew increasingly grave. "Sarah, this is consistent with trained medical alert behavior. Has anyone mentioned the possibility of Max being a detection dog?" Before she could respond, the door opened, revealing Frank Thompson alongside an imposing man in a suit who introduced himself as Dr. Lawrence Mercer, Chief of Neurosurgery. "Mrs. Miller," Dr. Mercer began formally, "Mr. Thompson here has been rather, insistent that I speak with you regarding your son's condition. Something about a dog that can detect neurological abnormalities." His tone carried clear skepticism. Frank stepped forward. "Show him, Max," he commanded, without hesitation. Max returned to Ethan's bedside and again indicated the specific area on the right side of the boy's head. Whining with urgency, Dr. Mercer's expression remained unchanged. "Mr. Thompson, while I respect your military background, you must understand that medical decisions are based on clinical evidence, not animal behavior. The dog has been alerting to this exact spot for weeks," Sarah interjected. "Before any symptoms appeared, before the headaches, before the seizure." "Mrs. Miller," Dr. Mercer began gently, "I understand your distress, but—" "This isn't about my distress," Sarah interrupted, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "This is about my son. Max has been trying to tell us something's wrong in that exact spot. And now Ethan's had a seizure. The CT showed areas of concern but wasn't definitive. What would it hurt to focus the MRI specifically on the area Max is indicating?" Dr. Anderson cleared his throat. "If I may, Dr. Mercer, there is established research on canines detecting various medical conditions through olfactory cues. The published literature includes cases of dogs accurately detecting cancers, impending seizures, and blood sugar abnormalities." "I'm familiar with those studies," Dr. Mercer replied dismissively. "Most have methodological flaws and limited sample sizes." Frank Thompson, who had been observing silently, placed a folder on the small table. "Project Guardian documentation? Redacted, but the performance metrics are intact. 87% accuracy in detecting neurological abnormalities before conventional testing, higher for certain specific conditions." Dr. Mercer glanced at the papers without touching them. "Even if I were to accept these claims, which I don't, hospital policy doesn't allow for medical decisions based on a dog's behavior. The tension in the room was broken by a small voice from the bed. "Please," Ethan whispered, his hand resting on Max's head. "Max is trying to help me." Something in the boy's plea seemed to reach Dr. Mercer. He sighed heavily, then approached the bed, observing Max's continued focus on the specific area of Ethan's head. "The MRI is scheduled for morning anyway," he said finally. "I suppose there's no harm in paying particular attention to this region, but I want it clearly understood that this is not standard protocol." After Dr. Mercer left, Frank explained his presence. "I was searching for Max when Linda found me. She mentioned Ethan was in the hospital, and I knew Max would try to reach him. These dogs form incredibly strong bonds with those they're protecting." "How did he even find Ethan?" Sarah asked, watching as Max maintained his position beside her son. "The hospital is 6 miles from our house. These dogs were selected for exceptional intelligence and trained to track specific individuals across challenging terrain. Max would have followed Ethan's scent." Frank's expression softened. "I should have approached you sooner, been more direct. After the program was shut down, I've been trying to locate the dogs, make sure they're safe and with people who understand their capabilities." "Why didn't you just adopt Max yourself from the shelter?" Dr. Anderson asked. "I tried. They wouldn't release him to me without official military documentation, which I couldn't provide after the program was classified. By the time I found another approach, Max had already been adopted." And Frank looked at Ethan, now sleeping with his hand still resting on Max's fur. "And then I saw how he was with your son. Some things are meant to be." The night passed with Sarah dozing in the uncomfortable hospital chair, waking frequently to check on Ethan. Max remained vigilant, his eyes opening whenever a nurse entered to check vitals, only to resume his protective watch afterward. Morning brought the scheduled MRI, with Dr. Mercer supervising personally. Sarah waited anxiously in the consultation room, Max leashed beside her, the dog unusually restless in Ethan's absence. When Dr. Mercer finally entered, his demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the skepticism, replaced by professional concern. "Mrs. Miller," he began, sitting across from her. The MRI revealed a small tumor in the right temporal lobe, exactly corresponding to where the dog has been alerting. It's approximately 2 centimeters in diameter, in a location that wouldn't have been immediately obvious on the standard CT scan. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "A tumor, is it?" "We won't know if it's malignant until we can biopsy it, but the location and characteristics are consistent with a juvenile pilocytic astrocytoma. These are usually benign and respond well to surgical removal." Mercer hesitated, then added, "The area Max was indicating was precisely where the tumor is located, not the general region, the exact location." "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her hand instinctively finding Max's fur. "We need to operate as soon as possible. The seizure was likely caused by pressure from the tumor. With your consent, I'd like to schedule surgery for tomorrow morning. We have one of the best pediatric neurosurgeons on staff, Dr. Eleanor Chen. As Dr. Mercer outlined the surgical procedure and risks. Sarah felt a surreal calm descend. The weeks of uncertainty and dismissed concerns had given way to concrete action. There was a name for what threatened Ethan, a plan to combat it, a team assembled to help. News of Max's extraordinary behavior spread quickly through the pediatric floor. By afternoon, Several doctors had come by to observe the German Shepherd, some openly curious, others maintaining professional distance while clearly intrigued. The hospital administrator arrived to discuss the unique situation, ultimately deciding that Max could remain with Ethan under Dr. Anderson's supervision until surgery. Frank Thompson returned with additional documentation about Project Guardian, sharing it with Dr. Mercer and his surgical team. The program accumulated significant data on tumor detection specifically, he explained. Dogs like Max could often detect tumors months before they became symptomatic enough for conventional diagnosis. As evening approached, bringing with it the heavy knowledge of tomorrow's surgery, Sarah sat beside Ethan's bed, explaining in simple terms what would happen. "They're going to fix your headaches, sweetheart," she told him. "Dr. Chen is going to remove what's been hurting you." Ethan nodded solemnly, his eyes drifting to Max. "He knew I was sick." "Yes," Sarah confirmed. "He's been trying to tell us for a long time. Will he be here when I wake up?" The question brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. Hospital policy would never allow the dog in post-surgical recovery, but she couldn't bear to add that worry to Ethan's burden. Before she could formulate a gentle explanation, Frank spoke from the doorway. "We'll make sure of it, buddy. Max will be waiting for you." As night settled over the hospital, the reality of tomorrow's risks loomed larger in Sarah's mind. Despite Dr. Mercer's assurances about the likely benign nature of the tumor, brain surgery carried inherent dangers: infection, bleeding, damage to surrounding tissue. She found herself praying for the first time since Thomas's death, not with the angry desperation of those early grief-stricken days, but with quiet hope. Max remained at his post beside Ethan's bed, occasionally looking up at Sarah as if to reassure her. In the German Shepherd's steady gaze, she found unexpected comfort, a reminder that sometimes protection comes in forms we don't immediately recognize, and that help can arrive in our darkest moments from the most unexpected sources. The pre-surgery preparation began at 5:30 a.m., the hospital corridor still dim with pre-dawn shadows. Sarah held Ethan's hand as the nursing staff moved efficiently around them, checking vitals, confirming medications, reviewing protocols. Dr. Chen, the pediatric neurosurgeon, stopped by for a final consultation, a petite woman with calm confidence who explained each step of the procedure in terms Ethan could understand. "We'll make a small window here," she demonstrated on a model skull, pointing to the right temporal region. "Then we'll remove the tumor very carefully. You'll be asleep the whole time, and when you wake up, the headaches should be gone." Ethan nodded solemnly, his fingers tangled in Max's fur. The German Shepherd had remained unusually still throughout the morning, sensing the gravity of the situation. "It's time to say goodbye to Max for now," the nurse said gently, checking her watch. "He'll be waiting when you're all done." Sarah watched her son wrap his arms around the dog's neck, whispering something into his ear. Max responded with a soft whine, pressing his muzzle against Ethan's cheek. "You're being so brave," Sarah told Ethan, fighting to keep her voice steady as they prepared to wheel him to the surgical floor. "I'll be right here waiting, and so will Max." Dr. Anderson had arranged for Max to stay in an empty examination room during the surgery with Frank Thompson keeping him company. As they walked the dog away, Sarah felt a sudden, irrational urge to call them back, as if Max's presence somehow ensured Ethan's safety, and his absence left her son vulnerable. "He's in good hands," Linda reassured her, arriving with coffee and a change of clothes for Sarah. The best hands. The surgical waiting area was designed for comfort that never quite reached those who occupied it. Muted colors, soft seating, subdued lighting, all attempts to soften the reality of loved ones under the knife. Sarah paced, unable to settle despite her exhaustion. Linda maintained a steadfast presence, fielding calls from concerned co-workers and neighbors, ensuring Sarah ate something from the cafeteria. The first hour passed in tense silence. The second brought mounting anxiety as Sarah's mind conjured every possible complication. By the third hour, she had resorted to counting ceiling tiles to keep panic at bay. Family of Ethan Miller, a surgical liaison in blue scrubs, approached, clipboard in hand. Sarah stood immediately. "I'm his mother. Is everything okay?" "Dr. Chen asked me to update you. They've successfully accessed the tumor site. Everything is proceeding as expected. She'll come speak with you when the surgery is complete." Relief washed over Sarah, quickly followed by renewed anxiety. They'd only reached the tumor removal was still to come, with all its attendant risks. As the fourth hour of surgery stretched into the fifth, Sarah felt herself transported back to another waiting room 2 years earlier, the night Thomas's car had been hit by a drunk driver. The same antiseptic smell, the same hushed conversations around her, the same terrible powerlessness. She had lost her husband that night, despite the doctor's best efforts. The thought of losing Ethan, too, was unbearable. "Sarah," Linda's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "You've been staring at that wall for 20 minutes. Talk to me." "I can't lose him, Linda." The words emerged as barely a whisper. "He's all I have left." "You're not going to lose him. This isn't like Thomas. The tumor is likely benign. Dr. Chen is the best neurosurgeon in 3 states. "I should have known sooner," Sarah continued, guilt washing over her. "Max was trying to tell me for weeks, and I didn't understand. If I'd pushed harder with the doctors earlier." "Stop." Linda's voice was firm. "You did everything possible. You advocated for Ethan when everyone dismissed your concerns. You trusted your instincts and Max's behavior when medical professionals told you it was nothing. If anything, you're the reason they found this tumor before it caused more damage." Before Sarah could respond, Dr. Chen appeared in the waiting area doorway, still wearing her surgical cap. Sarah couldn't read the surgeon's expression and felt her heart drop. "Mrs. Miller, the surgery is complete. How is he? Is Ethan okay?" Sarah asked, standing so quickly she felt lightheaded. "We successfully removed the entire tumor," Dr. Chen explained, guiding Sarah to a quieter corner. "It was encapsulated, which made extraction cleaner than we sometimes see with these tumors. We've sent it to pathology, but based on appearance, I believe it's the benign juvenile pilocytic astrocytoma we suspected." "So he's going to be all right," Sarah pressed, needing absolute clarity. Dr. Chen's expression shifted subtly. "There was a complication during removal. The tumor was located near an area that controls certain motor functions. We had to work very carefully, but there was a moment of increased intracranial pressure that resulted in some swelling." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "What does that mean for Ethan?" "We won't know the full impact until he wakes up, but there may be some weakness on his left side. This is often temporary with proper rehabilitation. But I want you to be prepared." Dr. Chen placed a hand on Sarah's arm. He's being moved to the pediatric ICU now. You can see him once he's settled. The pediatric intensive care unit was a world of beeping monitors, hushed voices, and the particular heaviness that comes with critically ill children. Ethan lay still in the center of a web of tubes and wires and oxygen line, IV drips, EEG leads monitoring his brain activity. His head was wrapped in white bandages, his face pale against the hospital pillow. Sarah approached slowly, as if any sudden movement might somehow harm him further. She took his small hand between hers, noting how cold his fingers felt. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered. "Mom's right here." The hours after surgery stretched into evening with no sign of Ethan waking. Dr. Chen explained this wasn't unexpected. His brain needed time to recover from both the tumor and the surgical intervention. Still, each hour that passed without those eyes opening felt like an eternity. Linda had to leave for her night shift but promised to return in the morning. Frank checked in periodically with updates about Max, who had reportedly been restless and anxious all day, refusing food and pacing in the small examination room where he was being kept. As midnight approached, Sarah sat in the uncomfortable chair beside Ethan's bed, still holding his hand, fighting exhaustion. The PICU nurses moved quietly around her, checking monitors, adjusting fluids, recording vitals. One particularly kind nurse named Joanna brought her a blanket and a cup of decent coffee. "You should try to sleep," she advised. "We'll wake you if there's any change." "I can't," Sarah said simply. "Not until I know he's okay." It was nearly 2 a.m. when Sarah felt Ethan's fingers twitch in her hand. She sat up immediately, searching his face for signs of consciousness. "Ethan, can you hear me? Sweetie?" His eyelids fluttered but remained closed. A small moan escaped his lips. Sarah pressed the call button, and Joanna appeared almost instantly. "I think he's waking up," Sarah explained, her heart racing. The nurse checked monitors and gently spoke Ethan's name, testing his response. After a moment, his eyes opened halfway unfocused, confused. "Ethan, you're in the hospital," Joanna explained calmly. "The surgery is over. Your mom is right here." Sarah leaned closer. "I'm here, baby. You're doing so well." Ethan's lips moved, forming a word Sarah couldn't quite catch. She leaned closer. "What is it, sweetie?" "Max," he whispered, the single word barely audible. "He's waiting for you," Sarah assured him, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He can't wait to see you." Joanna checked Ethan's pupil response with a small light, then asked him to squeeze her fingers. Sarah watched anxiously as Ethan's right hand responded immediately, but his left hand barely moved, confirming Dr. Chen's warning about potential weakness. "I need to notify Dr. Chen that he's regained consciousness," Joanna explained, making notes in the chart. "This is all very positive, but try to keep him calm and quiet. No overstimulation." As the nurse stepped away, Ethan's eyes found Sarah's, more focused now. "Head hurts," he murmured. "I know, sweetheart. They gave you medicine for the pain. It should start working soon." Sarah stroked his arm gently. "Do you remember why you're in the hospital?" Ethan's brow furrowed. "Max knew I was sick." The simple statement broke something in Sarah, the dam of composure she'd maintained throughout this ordeal. Tears flowed freely now as she nodded. "Yes, he did. and now the doctors have fixed what was making you sick." Dr. Chen arrived minutes later. Performing a brief neurological assessment, Ethan responded to simple commands, recognized people and objects, and remembered basic information. His left side weakness was pronounced but not complete paralysis, a hopeful sign for recovery. "He's doing remarkably well," Dr. Chen told Sarah quietly. "The next 24 hours are still critical for monitoring swelling, but these initial responses are very encouraging." After the doctor left, Ethan drifted back to sleep, his breathing more natural now. Sarah remained vigilant, watching every rise and fall of his chest, finding new appreciation for each simple breath. In this quiet moment of guarded hope, Sarah reflected on how quickly life could change, how an ordinary rescue dog had somehow become Ethan's unlikely guardian, how a military program's failure had paradoxically led to her son's survival, how the most devastating moment of her life might yet lead to recovery rather than loss. Dawn was breaking outside the hospital windows when Ethan woke again, more alert this time. His first words were once more about Max, asking when he could see him. Sarah promised it would be soon, but inside she worried about hospital regulations preventing the reunion her son so desperately wanted. What she couldn't know as she sat holding her son's hand was that several floors below, Frank Thompson was engaged in a quiet but determined conversation with the hospital administrator about exceptions to policy in extraordinary circumstances, a conversation that would forever change Memorial Hospital's approach to healing. The pathology report arrived midday, confirming Dr. Chen's initial assessment. Ethan's tumor was indeed a juvenile pilocytic astrocytoma, benign and now completely removed. The news brought palpable relief to the PCU, where Ethan had spent a fitful morning drifting between sleep and wakefulness, his left side still notably weaker than his right. "This is excellent news," Dr. Chen explained to Sarah, flipping through the detailed report. "These tumors rarely recur after complete resection, and the cellular structure shows no atypical features. We'll still want regular follow-up scans, of course, but this is the best possible outcome." Sarah nodded, absorbing the information through a haze of exhaustion and relief. "And the weakness on his left side? The post-surgical swelling is already beginning to subside. Based on his age and overall health, I expect significant improvement in motor function over the coming weeks. Physical therapy will be essential, but children his age typically show remarkable neuroplasticity." The medical terminology washed over Sarah. Complex terms for a simple truth: Ethan would recover. After weeks of escalating fear and uncertainty, after hours of surgical terror, after the echoing grief of another hospital vigil, her son would live. The tumor that might have remained undetected until catastrophic damage occurred had been found and removed, thanks to an extraordinary dog who had refused to stay silent. "When can I bring Max to see him?" Sarah asked. "Ethan keeps asking." Dr. Chen's expression turned diplomatic. "Hospital policy is quite strict regarding animals in the ICU. Infection control concerns are significant with neurosurgical patients, perhaps once he's moved to a regular room." "Max isn't just any animal," Sarah insisted, thinking of the dog's persistence, his unfailing focus on the exact location of Ethan's tumor. "He saved my son's life when every medical professional dismissed our concerns." Before Dr. Chen could respond, a light knock on the door frame announced the arrival of the hospital administrator, Dr. William Foster, accompanied by Frank Thompson. The administrator was in his 60s, with silver hair and the measured demeanor of someone accustomed to navigating hospital politics. "Mrs. Miller," Dr. Foster began. Mr. Thompson has shared some rather remarkable documentation with me regarding your son's German Shepherd and the military program it was part of. Sarah glanced at Frank, who nodded slightly. Project Guardian was classified, Frank explained. But given the circumstances, certain aspects have been cleared for limited disclosure. I've provided Dr. Foster with performance metrics and training protocols that demonstrate Max's capabilities aren't coincidental or anecdotal. Dr. Foster cleared his throat. While our policies exist for good reason, extraordinary circumstances occasionally warrant exceptions, with appropriate precautions. Sterilization protocols, limited duration. Veterinary clearance, we may be able to arrange a brief visit once Ethan is stabilized. The concession was unexpected, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude toward both men. Thank you. It would mean everything to Ethan. As they discussed logistics, Sarah noticed Dr. Chen studying the Project Guardian documentation with growing professional interest. The neurosurgeon's initial skepticism seemed to be giving way to scientific curiosity. The tumor location correlation is remarkable, she commented, examining a diagram showing canine alert patterns. The statistical probability of random chance producing such consistent results is virtually nil. Frank nodded. The dogs were recording an 87% accuracy rate before the program was discontinued for certain types of tumors, including astrocytomas. The rate was even higher. The problem wasn't effectiveness, it was cost, logistics, and the medical establishment's resistance to non-technological diagnostic methods. Dr. Chen looked up from the papers. I've read studies on cancer-detecting dogs, but nothing with this level of specificity for neurological conditions. This could have significant implications for early detection protocols. That was the original intention, Frank agreed. Before budget cuts and shifting priorities intervened, by afternoon, Ethan had been moved from intensive care to a step-down unit, his condition upgraded to stable. The left side weakness remained, but he had managed to form a fist when asked. Progress that Dr. Chen noted as encouraging. Sarah had stepped out briefly to shower and change into fresh clothes Linda had brought, returning to find Ethan more alert and oriented than he'd been since surgery. "When's Max coming?" he asked immediately, the words slightly slurred but comprehensible. "Soon," Sarah promised, smoothing his hair away from the bandages. "There are some special rules they have to follow first, but they're working on it." Ethan's expression grew serious. "He saved me, didn't he? He knew I was sick when nobody else did." Sarah sat carefully on the edge of the bed. "Yes, he did. Max was trying to tell us something was wrong for a long time. He's a very special dog. Mr. Thompson said he was a hero dog in the Army." Sarah raised an eyebrow, wondering when Frank had shared this information with Ethan. Something like that. He was trained to find things that doctors sometimes can't see right away. Like my tumor. Exactly like your tumor. Sarah marveled at her son's matter-of-fact acceptance of what had happened. Children often possessed resilience that adults could only envy, the ability to face extraordinary circumstances without the accumulated fears and anxieties that clouded adult perspectives. That evening, Dr. Anderson arrived with news that Max had been thoroughly examined, bathed with surgical-grade antiseptic solutions, and cleared for a brief hospital visit. The veterinarian had personally supervised the process, ensuring compliance with the strict protocols established by the Infection Control Department. "He seems to understand something important is happening," Dr. Anderson reported. "His behavior has been impeccable throughout the preparation process, not a single complaint, despite procedures that would send most dogs into a panic." The reunion was scheduled for the following morning, contingent on Ethan's continued stability and final approval from Dr. Chen. Sarah spent the night in the reclining chair beside her son's bed, dozing fitfully, waking at each change in his breathing pattern or monitor beep. During one such awakening past midnight, she found Ethan watching her in the dim light, his eyes solemn. "What is it, sweetheart?" she asked, immediately alert. "Are you in pain?" He shook his head slightly. "I had a dream about Dad." Sarah's breath caught. Ethan rarely spoke about Thomas since the accident. What was the dream about? He was walking Max on a leash. He said he sent Max to watch over me. Ethan's voice was drowsy, dream and reality blurring at the edges. "Do you think that's true?" Sarah felt tears well in her eyes. "I think Dad would have done anything to protect you, including sending us Max." Sometimes the simplest explanations were the most comforting, especially to a 7-year-old who had endured more loss than any child should. Morning brought a flurry of activity, final neurological checks, bandage changes, and the approval Sarah had been waiting for. At precisely 10 o'clock, Frank Thompson appeared in the doorway with Max on a short leash. The German Shepherd was immaculate, his coat gleaming, wearing what appeared to be a brand-new blue bandana with "Therapy Dog in Training" embroidered on it. "Someone's eager to see you," Frank said, addressing Ethan with a warm smile. Max remained perfectly controlled at Frank's side, but his attention was laser-focused on Ethan, ears forward, body tense with anticipation. A nurse checked the visitor tag clipped to the bandana, verified the authorization paperwork, and nodded her approval. 15 minutes, as discussed. She reminded them, and no contact with the surgical site. Frank released the leash command that had been keeping Max in position. "Go say hello, Max." The German Shepherd approached the bed with careful restraint. Despite his obvious excitement, he sniffed Ethan thoroughly, from his feet to his shoulders, deliberately avoiding the bandaged area of his head as if he understood the surgical site needed protection. "Max," Ethan whispered, his weak left hand reaching toward the dog. Max gently placed his head under Ethan's palm, enabling contact without requiring the boy to lift his arm. The intuitive understanding brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. "He remembers everything about his training," Frank observed quietly, standing beside Sarah, "including how to interact with patients who have limited mobility." For the next 15 minutes, Max remained beside Ethan's bed, occasionally nudging the boy's hand or placing his chin on the mattress edge. The effect on Ethan was remarkable. His vital signs, constantly displayed on the bedside monitor, showed decreased heart rate and blood pressure, physiological evidence of the calming influence Max provided. When the nurse returned to indicate time was up, Sarah expected resistance from Ethan. Instead, her son nodded solemnly. "Max needs to go now so I can get better," he announced with surprising maturity. "But he'll come back, right?" "Absolutely," Frank confirmed. "In fact, I've been discussing a formal therapy dog program with Dr. Foster. Max would need additional certification, but given his background and temperament, it should be straightforward." As Frank prepared to lead Max away, the German Shepherd did something unexpected. He turned toward Ethan's bedside table, where the pathology report lay in a manila folder, and pointedly sniffed it before looking at Frank. "All clear, buddy," Frank said quietly, patting the dog's head. "You did your job. The threat's been removed." The simple exchange crystallized something, for Sarah Max hadn't merely detected Ethan's tumor by chance. He had been fulfilling his training, his purpose, protecting Ethan with the same dedication with which he'd once served in the military. The dog had recognized a threat and persistently alerted until that threat was addressed, despite being surrounded by humans who failed to understand his warnings. As Max left the room with one final glance toward Ethan, Sarah felt a profound shift in her understanding. The mysterious behavior that had worried and confused her for weeks now made perfect sense. It wasn't strange or concerning, but purposeful and determined. Max hadn't been acting oddly. He'd been doing exactly what he was trained to do, with a precision that had ultimately saved her son's life. 3 months after surgery, Ethan stood in the backyard of their Millfield home, throwing a tennis ball with his left arm. The movement was deliberate, part of the physical therapy exercises designed to rebuild strength and coordination on his affected side. Max waited patiently, amber eyes tracking the ball's wobbly trajectory before retrieving it with efficient precision. "Good throw, buddy," Sarah called from the patio where she was reviewing follow-up appointment schedules. "That's definitely stronger than yesterday." Ethan's recovery had progressed with the resilience typical of children his age. The initial left side weakness had improved dramatically under the guidance of Ms. Perez, a physical therapist who had quickly won Ethan's cooperation by incorporating Max into their sessions. The surgical scar, once angry and red beneath his sandy hair, had faded to a thin white line, now mostly hidden as his hair grew back. Dr. Chen had pronounced herself cautiously optimistic at their most recent follow-up, reviewing the clean MRI scans with evident satisfaction. "The resection site is healing beautifully," she'd explained, pointing to areas on the screen that meant little to Sarah but clearly pleased the neurosurgeon. "And his motor function improvements are right on track." Life had settled into new routines. Sarah had returned to work at Memorial Hospital, though with adjusted hours that allowed her to be home when Ethan returned from school. Her colleagues had rallied around them during the crisis, donating sick leave hours and organizing meal deliveries during those first difficult weeks after Ethan's discharge. The hospital itself had undergone subtle but significant changes following Ethan's case. Dr. Foster, influenced by the undeniable evidence of Max's detection abilities, had established a pilot program exploring animal-assisted diagnosis and therapy. Dr. Chen had co-authored a case study with Dr. Anderson, documenting Max's accurate tumor detection and advocating for further research into canine medical alert capabilities. Max, once simply a rescue dog with mysterious behaviors, had become something of a local celebrity. The German Shepherd now wore an official therapy dog vest when accompanying Ethan to follow-up appointments, his calm demeanor and impeccable behavior earning him privileges rarely granted to animals in medical settings. He had even been featured in the local newspaper, photographed beside Ethan with the headline, "Four-legged hero, the dog who detected the undetectable." Frank Thompson had become a fixed presence in their lives, initially visiting to check on Max and Ethan's progress, eventually becoming a trusted friend. His military background and canine handling experience proved invaluable as Max transitioned into his new role as both family pet and certified therapy dog. He was trained to save lives in combat zones, Frank explained one evening as they watched Max and Ethan playing in the yard. Now he's saving lives in a different way. That's more than most of us get a second purpose. The statement carried weight coming from Frank, who had gradually shared more of his own story. After losing his military canine partner in Afghanistan and suffering injuries that ended his deployment, he had struggled to find meaning in civilian life. Project Guardian had offered renewed purpose, using his handling skills to train dogs for medical detection rather than combat operations. When the program was abruptly defunded, Frank had dedicated himself to tracking down the dispersed dogs, ensuring they found appropriate homes where their special abilities wouldn't be wasted or misunderstood. Max was the last one, he admitted. I almost gave up looking for him. Then I spotted him with Ethan at the park that day, displaying classic alert behavior. I knew immediately what was happening. "Why didn't you just tell me?" Sarah had asked, still occasionally troubled by the memory of those weeks when she'd viewed Frank with suspicion. "Would you have believed a stranger telling you your son had a brain tumor, based solely on how your dog was behaving?" Frank had replied simply, "I needed evidence before approaching you, and I needed to be certain Max wasn't giving false alerts." Now, watching Ethan laugh as Max performed an exaggerated play ball before returning the tennis ball, Sarah marveled at how thoroughly their lives had been transformed by the arrival of one extraordinary dog. Ethan had not only recovered physically but had blossomed emotionally. The selective mutism that had followed his father's death had given way to a talkative, engaged child who eagerly shared stories about Max with classmates and proudly accompanied Frank to educational presentations about service animals. The doorbell rang, announcing Linda's arrival. Her best friend had remained a steadfast support throughout Ethan's recovery, often bringing her own children over for play dates that helped normalize life after the medical crisis. "Look at you," Linda exclaimed, watching Ethan throw the ball with his left arm. "Miss Perez is going to be so impressed at your next session." "Max helps me practice," Ethan explained seriously. "He doesn't mind if the throws are bad." Inside, while Ethan continued playing with Max under Linda's supervision, Sarah prepared coffee and retrieved a stack of mail from the counter. Among the bills and advertisements was an official-looking envelope bearing the letterhead of the Regional Medical Research Foundation. She opened it curiously, unfolding a formal letter of invitation. "They want Max to participate in a research study," she told Linda when she returned to the patio. "A formal evaluation of canine detection capabilities for neurological conditions." Linda raised her eyebrows. "Are you considering it?" "I think so. Frank says it could help validate what these dogs can do. Maybe even revive something like Project Guardian, but in the civilian medical sector." Sarah watched her son and his dog, remembering those desperate days when Max had tried so persistently to communicate what no one else could see. If it helps another child get diagnosed earlier, how could we refuse? The study would be only the beginning. In the months that followed, other families began reaching out parents with children showing unexplained symptoms. Adults with concerns dismissed by medical professionals, veterans with PTSD seeking canine support. Sarah found herself becoming an accidental advocate, sharing Ethan's story at medical conferences where once skeptical doctors now listened with cautious interest. Anderson and Frank eventually established the Guardian Partnership, a non-profit organization dedicated to training medical alert dogs and placing them with individuals at risk for conditions that might benefit from early detection. They started small, with 3 dogs and a modest training facility on the outskirts of town. But the waiting list for their services grew rapidly as success stories accumulated. On a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after surgery, Sarah sat on the elementary school auditorium stage beside Ethan and Max, listening as her son confidently addressed his assembled schoolmates for Community Heroes Day. "This is my dog Max," Ethan announced, his voice clear and strong. "He used to be a military working dog, But now he's my best friend and a medical alert dog. When I was sick and didn't know it, Max tried to tell everyone something was wrong with my head. He kept sniffing right where the tumor was, even though no one could see it. He wouldn't give up until someone listened. The children sat cross-legged on the floor, rapt with attention as Ethan continued his simple but powerful narrative, occasionally resting his hand on Max's head for reassurance. The doctors said if we had waited much longer, the tumor could have hurt my brain really badly. Max saved my life by being brave and not giving up. Ethan's voice wavered slightly, but he pressed on. My dad died in an accident 2 years ago, and I was really sad and stopped talking much. But Max helped me feel safe again. Sometimes heroes don't look like what you expect. Sometimes they have 4 legs and a tail. Principal Davies, who had once denied Max access to school property, now stood beaming at the side of the stage, the German Shepherd's official therapy credentials prominently displayed on his vest. The same parents who had expressed concerns about a large dog among children now applauded enthusiastically as Ethan concluded his presentation. That evening, Ethan fell asleep quickly after his eventful day. Max settled in his customary position beneath the boy's bed. Sarah stood in the doorway watching them, a quiet moment of gratitude washing over her. On Ethan's bedside table stood a framed photograph of Thomas holding infant Ethan, alongside a new edition, Ethan's school picture with Max sitting proudly beside him, both wearing matching blue bandanas. As she turned to leave, Sarah noticed Max's eyes gleaming in the dim light from the hallway. The German Shepherd watched her with that same intelligent awareness that had first struck her at the shelter, a connection that transcended ordinary human-animal relationships. "Thank you," she whispered, words inadequate for the depth of her gratitude. Max's tail thumped once against the floor, a quiet acknowledgment. He would remain at his post through the night, as he had every night since joining their family's silent guardian, faithful companion, unlikely hero, in the peaceful darkness of a sleeping household. Sarah found herself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together. Perhaps, she thought as she closed Ethan's door partway, some bonds are formed not by chance but by necessity, the universe's way of providing exactly what's needed, exactly when it's needed most, often in the form we least expect. When life deals its hardest blows, salvation often comes from unexpected places. In the story of Ethan and Max, we're reminded that sometimes our greatest protectors arrive on 4 paws, with hearts so loyal they refuse to be silenced. For those of us who've faced medical systems that dismissed our concerns, who've felt the heart-wrenching worry for a child or grandchild, who've experienced the crushing loneliness after losing a spouse, this story touches those raw places we know too well. It speaks to our deepest fears being unheard when something is terribly wrong. Watching a loved one suffer while feeling helpless and facing a system too rigid to see the truth before us. But it also affirms what we've learned through our years, that intuition matters, that persistence saves lives, and that the bonds between humans and animals transcend explanation. Max's unwavering dedication to Ethan reflects the protection we all wish to provide for those we love, while reminding us that healing and second chances can arrive in forms we never anticipated. In our wisdom years, we understand that true heroes rarely wear capes, sometimes they wear fur, and teach us that even in our darkest moments, we are never truly alone.